Piastri opening a lap behind, 3 seconds, 2 seconds.
And I can go faster, jeez. Yeah, risk.
Goes on next, 5 seconds, 4 seconds. Colapinto next, car pushing, 5 seconds. Colapinto 2 seconds. Sainz next car pushing, 6 seconds. Sainz 3 seconds, 2 seconds.
On time?
Every time.
So say again?
I'm just useless.
But that isn't obviously the case.
It clearly
you're not.
is.
What?
Yeah, just drove terribly. It is what it is.
Was it? Do you just not feel comfortable in the car in that part of quali? Did something change?
Nothing changed.
Right.
Can the best pilot in history feel completely useless in Formula One? What is behind the dramatic radio message of Lewis Hamilton in Hungary, who left the most experienced paddock ice cream? Lewis Hamilton was not only eliminated in the Q2 of the 2025 Hungary Grand Prix. That was the superficial trigger, but what happened next uncovered an emotional and identity storm of a pilot who has been in the peak of motoring for more than a decade. When Hamilton issued his heartbreaking on the radio of the team, every time, he was not talking only about the classification result. It was the purest expression of mental exhaustion and accumulated frustration that had been cooking from his arrival in Ferrari. These types of radio messages are not new in Formula One. The pilots, being subject to extreme conditions of stress, adrenaline and pressure, sometimes download strong emotions in their communications with the team. But Hamilton's thing in Hungary was different. There were no technical reproaches, there were no criticism of strategy or traffic. He did not blame the team, the track, or the weather. He blamed himself. And he did it with an almost painful rawness to witness. I am useless, absolutely useless. The team has no problems, you have seen that the car is in pole, so they probably need to change pilot. These words, in another context, might seem a normal self-criticism after a bad performance. But coming from Hamilton, the pilot with more poles, more victories and more records in the modern history of F1, became an emotional bomb. Because at that moment the heptacampion did not speak but the human being. It was not a message addressed to engineers or the press. It was a personal relief, a sincere confession that showed that, perhaps for the first time in his career, Hamilton is beginning to doubt himself. Behind that phrase there are months of tension contained. From his signing by Ferrari, the expectations were huge. The media presented him as the savior of Maranello, as the piece that was missing to return the glory to the Scuderia. But that pressure, far from diluting with the passage of the races, has intensified with each technical error, each failed session, each inevitable comparison with his partner Charles Leclerc. And Hungary was the drop that filled the glass. While Leclerc placed the same car in the pole position, Hamilton did not even get access to the Q3. That disparity was unbearable. Hamilton's body gesture when getting out of the car said everything. There was no anger, there was no drama. Only resignation. There was no fury on his face but sadness. A silence that shouted more than any word. The journalists who were waiting for him in the paddock found him a crest, barely with strength to answer questions. But when he did, he made it clear that it was not a car theme. Not lucky. It was something deeper, internal. This incompatibility becomes even more evident in rapid curves. There, the SF25 management system is forced by the lateral G-forces and becomes inconsistent in the delivery of assistance. In Hamilton's words during the first tests in Bahrain, what the hell happens with that assisted direction? That question was not rhetorical. It was the early alarm of a problem that neither Maranello engineers have managed to interpret at all. Because it is not only a matter of hardware, it is design philosophy. Ferrari has developed a car for another pilot, and is now trying to make someone work with a completely different DNA. But direction is not the only obstacle. The problem saga continued with a forced adjustment in the car height after the disqualification suffered by Hamilton in the China Grand Prix. In that race, the wear blocks that indicate the flat bottom contact with the ground showed excessive wear, which led Ferrari to raise the general height of the SF25. This modification, although necessary to comply with the regulations, ruined the efficiency of the soil effect. The car stopped sucking asphalt as before, losing that invisible but essential grip that allows pilots to take curves with extreme confidence. The most worrying thing is that the attempt of correction came late and incompletely. Ferrari introduced a new rear suspension in Belgium designed to allow a lower height without violating the technical rules. This solution promised to return competitiveness without sacrificing legality. But each modification in the suspension implies a complete rebalancing of the car. The aerodynamic pressure center changes, the way the car responds to mass transfers, and how the tires behave to the limit. In other words, it requires an integral adaptation that demands time, tests, and, above all, trust. And that's what Hamilton doesn't have. The car thus becomes a silent enemy. Not because it is slow Leclerc takes him to pole, but because he does not respond to the instinct of who drives it. In Formula One, trust is the basis of everything. When a pilot gets on a car that does not understand, he does not trust. And if you don't trust, stop before, enter slower, doubt in the vertex. And that doubt, that fraction of second loss in each curve, is what is sinking Hamilton Carrera after Carrera. Because when the machine does not adapt to the pilot, the talent is not enough. And that, where appropriate, is a technical drama, and also personal. In Maranello, not only is pressure breathed, the static electricity of a costume that is on the verge of emotional collapse is felt. What is happening within Ferrari in 2025 is not simply a technical challenge. It is a progressive fracture between two universes that do not finish aligning. On the one hand, a comfortable, competitive Charles Leclerc, and that continues to yield consistency. On the other, a Lewis Hamilton caught in a technical nightmare that has already begun to corrode its trust. This unbalanced dynamic is generating an increasingly difficult environment to manage, both for engineers and team leaders. This has produced a kind of internal technical gap. Leclerc has been developing with the DNA of the last Ferrari with the team, including the SF25. His comments, his feedback, and his preferences have been the basis for key decisions in the design of the car. And although this is natural, each team molds its car according to its main pilots. In this case, it has left Hamilton at a disadvantage from day one. Not due to lack of talent, but for lack of synergy. That performance disparity has not taken to move to the psychological field. In any team, when one of the two pilots makes a difference and the other suffers, alarm lights are lit. But in Ferrari, where the media pressure is constant and the expectation of victoria is part of the DNA, those lights quickly become fires. The tension between the two sides of the box is real. There are no public rupture gestures, but silences, looks, indirect comments to the press. Everything indicates that coexistence begins to tense. Each session where Leclerc ends in front, each Q2 in which Hamilton falls eliminated, deepens the abyss. Engineers also face an operational dilemma. Where do they put the resources? Do you adjust the car for Leclerc to remain competitive and fight for poles and podiums? Or reconfigure the car to adapt it more to the style of Hamilton, risking the balance they have already reached? This tactical bifurcation is especially dangerous in a season where each point counts. Because while Mercedes and McLaren continue to gain consistency, Ferrari runs the risk of getting trapped in an internal Cold War that makes them lose the championship train. And then there is the inevitable question: how will all this affect Hamilton himself? Because when a pilot begins to verbalize doubts about his value, as he did after the classification in Hungary, he is not only sending a message to the team. It is opening a dangerous door that can affect its relationship with mechanics, with strategists, even with team leaders. Formula One does not forgive the hesitation, and a costume tense rarely produces champions. Ferrari knows. But so far, it has not proven to have a clear plan to avoid collapse. Hamilton's radio message in Hungary is not just an isolated event in a complex season. It is a deep symptom of something much more serious: the disconnection between one of the greatest talents that this sport has given and the structure that promised to be its new home. And that disconnection is not fixed with a more simulator session, or with a specific aerodynamic improvement. What is at stake here is emotional stability, professional trust, and above all, the legacy of a pilot who has built his career based on resilience and technical excellence. When a pilot like Lewis Hamilton is allowed to verbalize phrases such as, "They probably need to change pilot," he is not making a simple criticism. It is externalizing an internal fracture that can no longer be supported. He is saying, raw and without filters, that the environment in which he is competing does not allow him to be the best version of himself. And that, in a sport like Formula One, where every millimeter of trust matters, can be lethal. What should disturb is not just that Hamilton is losing performance. What should worry everyone to Ferrari, his fans, his rivals is that he is beginning to lose faith in your car, in its adaptation, perhaps even in itself. Because when a pilot with his experience, with his record and capacity, he begins to question if he deserves where he is, an invisible countdown is activated. And nobody knows when it ends. Formula One is full of champion stories that went out when the environment stopped accompanying them. Of races that became uphill not due to lack of speed, but for the invisible erosion of trust. Sport does not forgive those who doubt, but it also does not help those who are trapped in inflexible structures. Hamilton is at that crossroads right now. And this is where reflection becomes inevitable. What does a pilot like Lewis need to recover his competitive fire? Can you really adapt to a car that was created without it in mind? Or is Ferrari who must take the initiative and transform its structure around the talent that has signed? Is this just an adjustment phase? Or the beginning of the end? Now it's your turn. Do you think Hamilton can reverse this situation before it is too late? Or are we seeing the beginning of your last chapter in F1? I want to read you down in the comments.